Hey everyone, Victor here. Let's get into phasing, budgets, timelines. So the phased approach is what I've used for years. I find it's really great. Basically, I break all the projects that clients approach me with into phases 1, 2, and 3, and I'm going to go over what those are. I use this to be able to kind of test whether I like working with clients, get a sense of if they pay and if they're on time, are they organized. It helps keep me organized and the client. It allows flexibility in terms of budgets and timelines, and we'll get into that. So phase one, in terms of a project, is your very early investigations into difficult questions about the project, basically research, or the very basic setup. This might be just setting up the React app and making a very first API call and loading something onto the page. It's just something very basic so that you can have a back and forth with the client, have a first exchange of work and payment, and see if you like working with them. I don't think that this should usually be much more than 10 hours work, and it's just to get the whole thing moving and on the right foot. Phase two is where the majority of the work will be done. This is really your big push kind of phase. So you're not going to try to cover every little detail on this phase, but you're trying to get the mass work, all the big views, all the different pages, all the big data flow stuff done. Phase two is where you're going to be doing probably 60% of the work. Now, phase three is a fun part. This is where all the little details and all the finishing. So this is all the stuff that you kind of ignored to some degree in order to really be able to get things done in phase two. In phase three, you're going to go back over and really make them perfect. Perfecting CSS, things that were more difficult, things that really required a lot of attention in small areas. That's what you're going to do in phase three. As well as phase three is a really useful bin for when you're doing phase two, all the extra stuff that a client comes up with as they're looking at your work and getting new ideas and adding to the scope, you dump into phase three. And that really helps you just not have to get distracted while you're in phase two. You can set it all into phase three, and the client will really appreciate that. I really find this is very useful internally as well. A three-phase approach. I approach this from our developer side as well. And every time I need to break things down in terms of getting things done, I generally use this three-phase approach. So I find phases to be really useful when it comes to budgeting as well. Budgeting can be a challenge when you're early on being a freelancer. It's hard sometimes to estimate a project in such a quick time as 5 or 10 minutes with a client. And you might feel a lack of confidence as to how to value your time and your work. When it comes to budgets, I like to give a range to clients. I think it's much more fair to do that, especially early on. So I might say, oh, your project is going to be between 3,000 and 5,000. And I'll tell them a few things that depends on based on their data and their requirements. I'll also break it into phases. So I might say, oh, phase one will be 500. Phase two will be around 2,000-3,000. And phase three will probably be a couple thousand more, but that may change as the project goes on. When you break it into pieces this way, it's much easier for the client to understand the costs and to appreciate the costs. It also makes it easier for you to adjust the costs as the project continues and things come up or change. You want to make your first phase small, again, so it's easy to just get started and get something moving without a big complicated relationship having to develop. You want to make a lot of caveats as well. Say things like, it depends with your client, because it does depend. It depends how ready their data actually is. Do they have designs ready for you or not? Are they just kind of flying by the seat of their pants, making up whatever as they go along? In that case, you can tell them it's going to be more expensive unless they become more organized. The phased approach also allows you to tell them certain things that are going to be complex. So for instance, if I was making some kind of complicated search filter dropdown, I would explain to the client that, yeah, okay, doing the search isn't that hard, but you want to add all these filters, and figuring out how all the different filters interact is probably going to be quite complex. So that's why we're going to put it in phase three, and why it's also a substantial portion of the budget. If you can explain a little bit of complexity, if you can place it into a container of phase 1, 2, or 3, and then to give the client a bit of reason why that's difficult, they'll really appreciate it, and they'll understand and respect your pricing a lot more than you just telling them a number for the whole project. Finally, when it comes to budgets, just be a little pessimistic and tell the client that you're being pessimistic. They'll appreciate it. They'll understand that it's better to overestimate rather than underestimate. And if it ends up being a lot less work than you anticipated, you're happy to make the price a little less. You don't really have to worry about that because it almost never happens that a project is really a lot simpler than it appears. It's almost always the other way around. So when it comes to timelines, we're looking at very, very similar subjects to budgets. So I'll just be brief here. We want to be flexible, but we want to look at meeting the client's needs. So if they need something within a month, is it possible for you to break down the phases into week 1, week 2 and 3, and week 4 in terms of laying out what you're going to do? Again, this is really about inspiring confidence in the client and also making sure that you're not going to face a lot of burnout as their needs get stronger at near the end. I would really emphasize being pessimistic with timelines. Don't take on a project where the timeline seems really tight to you. Even when you are being pessimistic, you're not sure you can make it. If you're going to do that, make sure the client is fully aware of it, because missing timelines is probably worse than missing budgets. Clients need to get things out on time, and if they have to overpay for it, they usually will. So phasing again helps here to stay organized, yet allow flexibility, and allows you to throw out some features of phase 3 if you need to, so that you can at least get the majority of the work done on time. In the next section, we'll be going over practical ways to apply this phasing approach and a little bit about budgets and timelines to our example projects. So see you soon.